Amen.
We are live. Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Molweni. Thank you for tuning in from, I think, all over the world, actually, to this just conversation that almost sets our hearts on fire in terms of the things and the place that we are mostly passionate about. So, welcome to our second tribe conversation. My name is Dr. Joy, and I'm the founder of the Nomalanga tribe, which has the mission of co creating healthier inner and outer worlds so that we can collectively thrive for ourselves and the next generation. So, the topic for today is really close to our hearts and to our reason for existence as a tribe. And we thought that while our audience is to work with leaders who have been given this tall order and ask to help make our societies thrive, society and the context in which we find ourselves becomes even more important because it comes with its own unique contextual realities. So, the topic for today is co creating a thriving African society. What do we need to unlearn? What do we need to relearn? And what do we need to transform really in order to get to a place of thriving? So, as a healer myself, I love the word thriving because it gives me this picture of life, right? That it represents life. So, when I think about the word thriving, I think, how do I give life to the spaces that I influence and think about? And for us, if I may ask the question, just to step back and say, well, what does a thriving society look like? And for the tribe, it really has to do with well being and holistic well being, for us to be physically well so that our bodies can carry all of these amazing ideas that we have, for us to be mentally well so that we can think with clarity and vision and direction, for our hearts to be well as well so that we can be convicted with the right intentions, which connects to our spiritual well being, a topic that we usually don't touch on, but for me, I think forms a great part of who we are as humans. And I think a great part of the ingredients that create our sense of thriving holistically. So, if I may just start to ask the panel, because we have an amazing panel with us today who can help really start unpacking some of these questions that I have as a young founder, an African startup. I really want to build something of meaning and relevance to our African continent. And I selfishly brought together a bunch of bright minds that I respect, that I've been reading on and following, to gather these insights collectively and really see what we can offer as a inclusive lens of what really makes us thrive. So maybe I can start with you. If we can ask just the first question, how would you answer it in terms of what does a thriving society look like to you?
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Um, to me, a thriving society looks like a remembering of who we are, Outside of everything else that's happening, our business remains humanity, you know? How do we listen to the noise of the world without allowing it to deafen us, Uh, the things that we do that are looked at as neutral acts, something as simple as looking away. You see that someone is hungry. You see, it's all about that. I know the word Ubuntu is really overused, but before you go outside, everything starts from within. Imagine if every single person just really didn't look away, just participating every single day in everything that you do with that sense of community, with that sense of integrity, with that sense of I'm not alone, I'm not walking this journey alone. I think for me, that is really the beginning. Before we look into society, culture, government, it's just, yes, remaining human on every single level if we can, you know? So I'll
Thank
start it there.
Thank you for opening us with that element. And then from you, Gavin? What are your initial thoughts on thriving?
Good evening to everyone. Lovely to be here. First of all, Dr. Joy and Mabato, I love what each of you have said very much. So the first thing that comes to mind for me for a thriving society is that we have strong local food systems. So it's not that we have to get money from somewhere, wherever we can, so that we can go to a shop to get food that's been sent from a long way away so that money can go back to where the food came from. But so I think the first thing is people engaged in that, or many different activities around growing food, and being able then to have a kind of a share economy where I can look after your children if you would give me a meal, that kind of thing, where education is not something that we send kids away for, but it happens in the everyday. We're doing things, learning about life, learning about Mother Earth, learning about each other through work and across generations, as a matter of course. And of course, you do have generational learning, but those are on specific topics, not this, standard 1, standard 2, standard 3 system, but more related to everyday life. I think the idea of human flourishing for me, of people being able to really realize who they are, and everyone to live with dignity, being able to work through issues without violence, either structural violence or violence of thinking, violence of language, certainly physical violence. So I'm starting to rattle on, so I'll leave it there and hand back to you, Dr. J. I see that Joy has faded, Jay. Maybe you should come in.
Yes, I think my reflection on the subject now, is a reference to Ubuntu. And Ubuntu, I think in many cases has been misconstrued that I am because we are, as a reference to just human beings. And I think if you go back in time, Ubuntu was the thread of life that connected human beings to Mother Nature. So Ubuntu refers to the idea that the desert has a spirit in it, and so does the ocean, so does the forest. So if you're looking at thriving, actually, why are we struggling to thrive in comparison to where the world is at the moment? If we had to go back and take several steps back to how people in Africa or the developing world lived in indigenous cultures long before slavery and colonization and capitalism, I mean, we were thriving societies in Africa or Asia or the Americas. And thriving because we had commerce, we had technologies, think about the technology of Africa that, if you burn Impepu, we can call on our ancestral spirits to help guide us. Now, there's no technology that exists in the modern world that can do that. So technology didn't come with the iPhone. It came from our relationship to Mother Earth and to Mother Nature. So I think the idea of thriving, the challenge we have is, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be South African? What does it mean to be African? And sometimes we have to go past the shadow of the damage that was done by colonization and slavery and the type of brutal exploitation of our mineral natural wealth and our people in Africa today. And so thriving, sometimes, if you want to understand what thriving means, maybe one should go to the village and sit down with the elders and learn from them. Because learning is not just the university or the school. Learning is life. Learning, yesterday I'm walking in a forest and I'm learning from the forest as the great teacher about how we should be. And so I think thriving, sometimes we want to build a model. We want to be like the East, or we want to be like Europe, or we want to be like America. Actually thriving was what the African society was, and going deeper and deeper into where we come from will tell us where we are at the present and how we need to recalibrate our trajectory of life in a way that embraces the past but takes us into the future.
Right. I love that you've kind of touched on those points for two important reasons. First is that we have some elders around us today that hopefully will share some insights. And secondly, this is why I brought Umimi Mabato on the panel to talk a little bit about how Africans in the past did use art to express themselves, because that point of going back to self, in order to understand how you then connect with nature and the earth in which you're at, for me, comes with a lot of self expression. So, Mimi, from your observation in the art world, what have been your observation in how we've used creativity and art? Particularly for me, I see them as frontiers of innovation and change of society that has a ripple effect in the world, and in even sort of founding trends and things like that, and fashion and hair, all of that sort of expression. In your observation, like over the years, how have you seen art shape culture and social change?
Thanks, Dr. Joy. I think actually what drew me to art is really the past, as I got into art, I realized, or I started learning about, ancient places, ancient Kemet, even the Kingdom of Mali, during the time of Mansa Musa, who's said to be the, I guess, richest man ever recorded, who ruled Mali and surrounding areas in the 1300s. But it dawned on me that the impulse to do art has been and is an ancient need, right? Art by indigenous people is not really something that was used as we see art today, something that you sell, something that's only exclusive to the elite. It was an integral part of society. There was a connection between the way of life and art. It was in the awareness of nature, just a connection, a respectful relationship with Mother Nature. The tools that were used at the time, it did connection, communicating with the ancestors, communicating with future people. Through whether it was hair, whether it was nails, wigs, face art, cave paintings, masks, sculpture, all of those things had a relationship, and art was said to be very spiritual. It wasn't something that it was more valuable than money. So even in West Africa, deities were said to even I guess take over these masks. So it was something very, very sacred. And so that for me, the reason why I went into art is because I wanted to bring, I guess, a sense of that and the modern together, to remain on the path, but still, modernize it, I guess, to a sense, and reading Ntongela Masilela, who writes extensively on African modernity, looking at art through the African lens, and instead of looking at it through the way Western people look at art. And also, when we think of famous, I guess, fine artists like Picasso, there was a time in around 1902 when they were influenced by, African art, and then a whole other movement came about, Cubism and all those things. So it all, as Elder Jay said, when you know the past and where you come from, you start to understand where we should go. So that's really what my interest in art is. It lies in, with the most sophisticated art that you will ever see, cave paintings. I mean, first of all, the time that it was painted, telling it's some of the most, the stories there, the dancing, the trance, the fire, they capture everything. It's like reading a book. It's a whole library. It's rituals, it's dance, it's poetry, it's everything in one. So I feel like indigenous people's art is so much more than just technique. It's something that is inherent. It can't be taught, so to speak. And so that's really what drew me to art. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you work with a lot of young African artists right now, and sort of connecting them globally as well. Do you see any shifts in just that artistic expression recently? And number two, I've just seen how, when you look at the stories around artists and creators, there's always like the struggle behind it in terms of just making a living. And it's like this very talented human being, right? Like, what is the art world doing in that case in terms of trying to make the arts also work for you in these modern times, for lack of a better way of asking it?
Right. So there's a few ways to answer that. So in terms of the art industry per se, most of it was really seen through the European lens, especially in South Africa. The way we deal with art is that most artists want to belong to an art gallery, because if you belong to an art gallery, then you're able to get into art fairs, it takes you to the next level. It's very, I guess, challenging for an artist to remain independent and get to the place where it has been done, it can be done. But then when I went to countries like Senegal, for instance, and an artist went to an art gallery and asked for his artwork back because he wanted to sell it independently to another person. And I was like, oh, the artist here is king. It's not the gallery that's king. But South Africa sort of follows that Western structure of, but I'm so happy to say in recent times, a lot of artists are going independent. They're selling their works directly thanks to lockdown, Instagram, social media. Now we no longer need a middle person to really sell our art. And also, more and more artists are standing together as this, I guess, every few decades, African art becomes the fashion in the international scene. And so, but what I'm seeing right now is that struggle between being independent, being part of this industry that's been standing, that kind of gatekeeps who can come in. We can only allow a few artists to thrive. Not everybody can make it. And that's really the opposite of what indigenous art is. It's very inclusive. There's space for everybody. And so I think what I'm seeing now is that striking that balance between doing what you feel and also being part of this, I guess, capitalism and making money from what you create, and still jotting down the ideas and still commenting on social issues. So let me stop there.
Right. I think you've touched on a tension point that really excites me, where it really came to me when I was studying Ubuntu and saw that there's a big tension, sometimes without even acknowledging it, between the I am, which is the self, affirming the self and its dreams and its ambitions and purpose, in alignment with the because we are the collective elements. So while it shows itself in the arts and trying to find, some navigation between that, I think it's a wider tension point in general that we struggle with, right? Even when we look at leadership, there's this sense of there's self-leadership that must still happen as there's collective leadership that must happen, and there needs to be a way that the I is also balanced and integrated. And I think Jay will touch on that from a masculine, feminine perspective a bit later on. But before we get into that, I wanted Unkulu Gavin to tell us a little bit about the mental model, if we can put it that way, of Ubuntu as a mindset, and how can we navigate, leverage, be inspired in a real tangible way in using that model in today's society world and what it requires of us.
Okay, very easy question. Thank you. Thanks so much, Gogo. I was listening to the references to Ubuntu. I'm glad Jay brought in also the relationship to nature. Kwantu. So Nyasha Mboti, who is the founder of something called apartheid studies, really argues that apartheid has not gone away and in fact is prevalent across the world. It's the result of European modernity, if you like, of the last 5 centuries of domination of a particular mindset and way of being. And it's etched into our educational systems and so on. So he wrote an article really cautioning about a very glib definition of Ubuntu. I am because we are. There's this harmonious feeling. We all love each other. Whereas society is, there are structural inequalities. There are many reasons for struggle. And so, you know, he questions the kind of easy formula and talks about a positive disharmony, where we need to really pay attention to what it is that we joining around and why, and where the individual, as Mabatu has said, where individuals play a very important role in starting to help the collective define where we are going and why. Particularly Tuli, and also I've heard Gogo Rutendo and Gara talking about the construction of the word Ubuntu, that it's Ubuntu, Ntu being the essence. And so in Setswana, Botu, Mutukabatu. So the Ntu is the essence, and that one needs to honor the essence of who we are. We need to honor the essence of life. We need to honor Mother Earth. And so I think that starts to show that there becomes an obligation and a responsibility if we want to take Ubuntu seriously. And this, in today's world, we have a really a situation, I've already said, of disharmony societally, but we've increasingly, it started over hundreds of years, but in the last half of the 20th century and almost accelerating now, we organize ourselves in bounded organizations. Each organization has its reason for being, its mission, its vision, its strategic competence, its unique selling point, what it's going to do, what it's not going to do, how it measures success, which is usually in monetary terms. And so all the things that are not taken up by an individual organization get left. Who's going to deal with them? Racism, sexism, climate change, poverty, the fact that unemployment is skyrocketing, inequality going up. Well, that's not my organization. I'm about such and such. So we have this bounded organizations theory that cages us, and it becomes a reflex. Anything we want to do, we form an organization for it. And so what Mabatu said, you see someone hungry, it's like, hey, man, you know, it's rough. People on the side, on the traffic light, you can't feed everybody, you know. So we live in a society where separation becomes a way of coping. So what I've been working on for some time now is the idea of unbounded organizing, where we work for the common good of humans in harmony with nature, or putting it another way, for the good of everything. And that means when there's, it implies very practical things for us. When there are issues to be dealt with, we don't say, well, the government will sort it out. Because the government is also organized in a bounded way. There's departments of this, departments of that, departments of that. There's hierarchies within the departments. There's national, provincial, local. Everything is bounded. Everybody's working to try and see how we go forward. You get a lot of discussion about how we're going to do what we do, and no one does it. Whereas the ancient societies that Jay is referring to, that we do indeed need to learn from, that we need to go to and find out, how did people do this? they were organized in age groups and generations, they were organized in clans, but there was common purpose. So unemployment isn't a word in any African language. There was no unemployment before slave trade and colonialism and the so-called modern economy. So, the thriving society works out how to deal with the issues we have. So, simple examples. A friend noted that there are homeless people living around the neighborhood. He decided each month I can put at least 5,000 to try and get something happening here. He went to his neighbors. Eventually, they have the homeless people, instead of everybody hiding behind the walls because we're going to get robbed from these homeless people are involved in productive work, making the pavements thing. There's a housing thing that they're building together, because 3 or 4 citizens decided let's try and make a change. Where I live, I love gardening, and I have a tiny little garden. Next door to us, there's quite a big estate where a lot of land is not used. We've had lots of discussion, but the long and short of it is that all the people who are gardeners and domestic, we've got permission that everyone can garden. Everyone can do what they need to do. Now, these are kind of cute little examples, but there are ways to look at organizing the whole, what I call an activity system. So for several years, as Jane knows, I have learned methods to work with large numbers of people, by which they learn how to organize on their own behalf. We're talking like 400 people working together, learning how to do it, emerging different enterprises, seeing how the enterprises interrelate. This is all possible. It's not a pipe dream. It means reimagining the way that things have to be. Because at the moment, there's this idea that the market will sort it all out. The market will deliver whatever we need. So, sorry, come in. I'm going on a bit much. Joy, please.
For somebody who didn't know and who hasn't read your amazing book, how do you describe unbounded organizing? And what place does it have in terms of some of those principles in the bigger system of how we work now?
Thanks. So I think the first thing is organizing across organizational boundaries, across, collaborating together, working across hierarchies. Right. It means building linkages between for-profit sector, non-profit, government initiative, multi-stakeholder initiatives to do things. It means the little kind of cute neighborhood initiatives that I've described. I think you'll find with spiritual fellowship, different Mpande might undertake some task that starts to be quite magnificent because of who they involve and the fact that their members come from all different parts of society and I have different influences. So I mean, often I've just said unbounded organizing is organizations collaborating to do something that everyone needs. But it doesn't have to be organizations. It can be across organization. It can be without any formal organizations involved. It's really looking us as human beings where we live, saying, what can we do together to make this work better? How do we tackle inequality? What do we do practically now? Sure, the big societal systems are there, and they organize like a pyramid where we elect representatives who are then going to make sure the laws are upheld, and then civil servants do things, and companies are going to produce and allow society to flourish, and non-profit organizations are going to keep culture alive and so on. But it doesn't have to be like a pyramid. It can be circles, collaborative circles, working together and linking with each other. I don't know if it sounds far-fetched, but we've managed to have that happen in several places.
Yeah, and I think for me, it lends itself quite beautifully to the concept of open systems. So organizations seeing themselves as open systems, and people
Absolutely.
see themselves as open systems. And I think the golden thread that I am almost getting from both Babato and yourself, Mkulu, is around like going back to that personal responsibility of what is your identity, yes, and your sense of expression. And then, secondly, what is the thing that you want to contribute to the greater sort of whole without losing yourself? And for me, that speaks to the role of leadership, you know. And for me, leadership really is about influencing the spaces that we care about. But we're seeing with this changing society globally that the ways in which we're leading needs to also be transformed and maybe relearned, maybe unlearned. I'm not really sure at this stage. Maybe it's a combination of things. But I do see a shift that's needed from this very, okay, yes, I've now affirmed that I have a role to play and a personal responsibility, but how do I go about now doing that in a way that makes sense for the context in which I find myself and what the future is requiring of ourselves? And I think from the studies that I've had and the leaders that I work with, it's this shift from this heroic, I have all the answers, I'm this title leader at the top that's going to tell people what to do and cascade, which has actually caused a lot of ill health amongst the leadership group, by the way, in terms of taking on, you know, all responsibilities and that mental health sort of issue. But moving from that paradigm of thinking and leading to a paradigm that they call post-heroic, which is what Mabato was saying earlier around being more inclusive, collaborative, open. And because in a system that's unbounded, you know, power shifts, it's very fluid, right? It depends on what the situation needs. And I wanted to bring Jay into the conversation, Elder Jay, around the type of leadership that you think is required to build almost this green economy that I think of now, especially when we expand our view of Ubuntu to include, you know, the Mother Earth as well. How can we learn from that shift and what type of leadership is now required of us in today's world?
Well, I think that the notion of a green economy, you know, there are lots of books written on it. But actually, if you go back to the fact that every one of us, white, black, brown, whatever color, comes from an indigenous past. We were all indigenous at one point. And then the question is, if you are indigenous, like, you know, Mkulu, Gav, and I work with indigenous people around the world. When an indigenous person looks at a forest, they do not see timber to cut, to sell down, to make money. They look at it and they look at the spirit of the forest. And they bow in respect to that forest. Because the forest, even if you go to a place like Venda and you talk to people that are truly indigenous and carry the traditions of the past, they look at a forest and they say, this forest is my pharmacy. When I'm ill, I go there and I know the herbs and the plants that will help me restore my health. This forest is my supermarket. It feeds me. And this forest is my temple. That's where I go and pray, because I see myself as part of that forest. And the problem with humanity today is they have this flawed notion that the only species that matter is us as human beings. And so we've alienated ourselves and we think that we have an agenda of domination. we have to control everything in nature. Well, we exist because of Mother Nature, of Mother Earth, and the blessing she gives us. You know, there's no school that the sun goes to that has to rise in the morning. There's no school or technology that produces oxygen that we breathe or water that we drink and sustain ourselves. So we have actually, there's a flaw in how we saw humanity emerging. So if you go back to a point where we lived as part of nature, everything we are existed because it was a blessing of the Creator. In whatever way you want to describe that Creator, there is something greater than ourselves that has created this planet and created the cosmos and created the universe. And we have evolved through that to a point where we live by its blessings, but now we are doing it in the opposite way. So if I go back to Ubuntu, we have taken the first part of Ubuntu, which is I am, and we've constructed an entire global system of economics, of politics around that agenda of me, myself, and I. And that's what's caused the ecological disaster, emergency we're facing that threatens not Mother Earth. Mother Earth has been here 4.5 billion years. She's seen 5 extinctions already, the last 60 million years ago that wiped out the dinosaurs. The real question we have to ask, have we as human beings earned the right to be here? Now, if you go back to an indigenous way of looking at it, take the coffee ceremony. Now, all of us love a cup of coffee in the morning. But actually, the way in which coffee became used, and the Ethiopians say we were the inventors of coffee, was a coffee ceremony. So the act of having a coffee would take hours, where the community will get gathered together, you will roast the beans, you will have the conversation about what divides us, and through that coffee ceremony, we will resolve the issues. Because what was core to where we come from was great spirit. Everything was spirit. Today, everything is money. So we've reduced everything to a commodity that we can sell, we can dispose, we can exploit, we can abuse. And that's the core of our dilemma today as human beings. And so if we have to restore the harmony between ourselves, or between ourselves and everything else that exists, and see the thread that connects us, then we will actually begin to earn the right to be here. And maybe our consciousness, our awakening, would restore a different relationship with each other and with everything that exists. And I think that's my hope, is that that's the type of leadership. But none of the systems of leadership today embrace that philosophy. And that's what you as a generation have to bring back. And art, culture, music is the carrier of that spirit. Because if we go back to first principles of where we come from, it's reciprocity. What I take is never greater than what I give. It's reciprocal. There's compassion. There's understanding that I am part of nature, not apart from her. And I think that approach is what helps build the unbounded organizing that Mkulu Gavin is talking about.
Yeah. And I think when I'm just listening to some of the characteristics that you're talking about that are required to be inclusive, they sound very much along the lines of feminine qualities, which I think, as we had mentioned before, is kind of the direction and the shift in which the world is kind of going towards, or should, in terms of what is now required of us in order to thrive. Do you have any more pointers, Elder J, that you can talk to us about in terms of how do we start including these feminine sort of qualities that are required without looking at it, through these political eyes, gendered eyes, and how we've celebrated the masculine so much? You're a guy as well. Like, how do you deal with that internal just navigation and allowing of these other qualities to also shine through in your leadership?
Well, our starting point, Dr. Joy, is my sister, is that we all possess the masculine and the feminine within ourselves. You know, and if you look at what has happened in the last thousands of years, in fact, in terms of my own lineage from my ancestors, we are coming to the end of an epoch of 26,000 years, and it's not like it ends; it sort of goes into the next epoch. But what happened in this epoch? We move from the hunter-gatherers that we were as men. And as we built settlements and we built cities, men lost their power or lost their role. And what happened is that they replaced it with the way in which we built a society based on transactions. Everything is a transaction. And the power then vested in men. And that's what caused, in particularly the last few thousand years, a toxic masculinity and patriarchy that crushed the role of the sacred feminine. And so we moved from what was intelligent collaboration between the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine to a world in which we sort of designed it that the woman's place is in the kitchen. The woman's place is to raise children, when in fact, it was never the case in indigenous communities. There was always an intelligent collaboration. And if you look at it, the sacred feminine represents life. That's why we call it Mother Earth. That's why men don't give birth to children. So the whole nurturing, caring, compassion, solidarity of a society is held by the sacred feminine. And with the crushing of that, what did we come up with? Brutal exploitation, slavery, genocide, war, colonization. If you look at the recolonization of Africa today, you know, we have been all made commodities. And we're saying that if we continue this trajectory, that's what we set into the stone of the DNA of the next epoch. But we have this unique opportunity today for us to recognize, like they do, you know, if you look at Native American cultures, indigenous cultures, the power sat with grandmothers. They decided who would go and hunt. They decided when they would go to war. The grandmothers held the power. And so when they made decisions on the basis that whatever decision we make today, what will that decision be as an outcome 7 generations from now? But we think, like what Mkhulu Gavin was talking about, we think in 5 years, or we think in 10 years, or we think in our lifetime. If we had to think intergenerationally, then we wouldn't make the decisions we're making here. Like in Limpopo today, they're cutting down baobab trees because they want to create jobs and they want to exploit the coal under the ground. But baobab trees is a deeply ancestral tree. It's where we gather lekotla under the tree and we discuss where do we want to go? How do we resolve the differences? Right. So I think we're at the point where we must recognize the differences between the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, but understand that we have to have an intelligent collaboration for us to build cohesion.
Yes, yes. Very good points there. And I see Umkhulu's on the line. We've been trying to get him on the line and having some tech issues because we really wanted him to shed some light on one of the most important sort of sacred sites in the world that we find in Mpumalanga called Inzalo Yelanga, the birthplace of the sun. I'm so excited about all the topics that have been kind of put on the table today. And I wonder if Mkhulu is able to share a little bit about their trip to Inzalo Yelanga and what that means for our African society. Let's hope technology is on our side. Mkulu, are you there? Can you hear us? Okay, maybe not. But I wanted us to just talk a little bit about the importance of sacred sites in our society, and as Elder Jay has mentioned, that they all have symbols and they played a particular sort of role. And sometimes when we're looking into the future, there becomes a need for us to see what back in society in ancient times is useful enough that guides us that we need to preserve as well. Like Inzalo Yelanga, which is the oldest stone calendar that was used in ancient African society on how to actually tell the days and when it was time to plant and when it was time to start new things, when it was time to go into harvest time, etc. So Mkulu uyasizwa, can you hear us? And could you share a little bit more on Inzalo Yelanga? Because I know I went there and I'm still finding the language to express like what I kind of experienced when I went there.
Oh, thokoza Ndlovukazi, ngiyazwakala mina. Thokozini.
Hey.
Yes Ndlovukazi. Inzalo yelanga. It is the oldest stone calendar in the world. Meaning that it's a calendar that marks the solstices as well as the equinoxes. Inzalo yelanga, it's older. That stone calendar, it's older than that one in Egypt. And it's older than the pyramids of Giza. The estimation currently, it's an estimation because we lack people, who are interested in such scientific sites for them to assist in terms of determining, the real, year of Inzalo Yelanga when it was established. But according to estimation currently based on the erosion of the dolorite, the stones, the blocks they used there, it's about 150,000 years. So it predates all other calendars. And it's right here in Mpumalanga. We've been trying to conscientize the government for them to look at that place and assist us here, in Africa. Because, for all these years, ever since Ghana was, got its independence, Africa has been using the wrong calendar. We are using a calendar which is based on the northern hemisphere. We are on the southern hemisphere. So it makes no sense for why, African governments, couldn't see, the importance of determining time. Because, when you make us kneel at the wrong, time, nothing, would actually work for Africa, because everything is twisted. When we're supposed to be kneeling, we are walking. When we're supposed to be walking, we are kneeling. Meaning that everything that we do, especially in terms of, the festivities like Easter and Christmas, those are festivities of the Northern Hemisphere. We're not supposed to partake in those things. But now, because nobody, has an interest, in terms of reviving, everything that is African, it's so easy for us to embrace and just normalize colonization. Because whoever determines your time controls your mind. So all this liberation we're talking about on the continent, it's baseless if, our time is out. So through the teachings of Ubabu Credo, who was insulted by most of, intellectuals and people, professors and doctors, when he was giving us all this knowledge, we got this information from him. He was also initiated, in that place. So in terms of, the spiritual side and the energy, that place is established along what is called the Golden Meridian. The Golden Meridian is the electromagnetic field of Earth. And the Inzalo Yelanga represent the sacral, chakra of Earth. And that electromagnetic field starts in Bluff, in Durban, which is, the root chakra of Earth. It goes up, passes Inzalo Yelanga until it reaches the Great Pyramid of, Giza. So this is a very important side for us, as African people, so that we are able to reconnect, to our former glory, and this confirms that a civilization started here, in the South, because of, these scientific, artifacts. There's another artifact, that calculated the movement of the moon. Is called the Libombo bone. There are two of these bones. There's one that is called the Shango bone. But now the Libombo bone is older than the Shango bone, which confirms that civilization started here in the South, then it was refined in the North. So it's a cry for, especially, African people, that we are being deprived of this very important knowledge, that would assist us in terms of, rebuilding the character of an African, person. So Inzalo Yelanga, it's very important. And Ubabu Credo said it is the holiest place on the continent, which has a potential to unite all Africans. Like now in September, when we usher in a new year, all Africans should do the pilgrimage there, because we witness, the Muslim go to Mecca, the Jews, they go to Israel. We have Inzalo Yelanga. So we've been trying to conscientize the nation about the importance, of this place, because that's what we need, unity as African people. Without unity, because we are too much fragmented, which is why nothing works for us, because it's easy to manipulate one against the other. And that has been the strategy ever since. So, for us, it is a practical, tool, the African calendar that we've reintroduced based on Inzalo Yelanga. It's a practical instrument to unite African people. We must do like the Chinese do. When it's their New Year, it doesn't matter wherever you are. You partake, on what happens at home. Not only the Chinese, but the Jewish people as well. It's only us African people who seem to be abnormal. We do things, completely, completely different. Things that don't resonate with nature. We are nature-centered. Everything, should give or create that resonance in our lives. So if we are led by people who are ignorant of this, spiritual power that Africa, needs for us to re-emerge, as normal people again. We've tried politics, we've tried religion. All these things will never unite people, on the continent. And this is what, we need, to use our, spiritual knowledge system to create that unity. So that when we need as African people, we kneel at the same time as well. So in Zalo and Babu Credo, we give thanks, for him to share this knowledge, so that he's not here, but he left a legacy that we cannot betray, so that, we fulfill his wishes, of seeing African people being united, seeing African people reconnecting with their former glory. Before we were colonized, this is the calendar we're using. Before the colonizer came here and they gave us a calendar which had just twisted everything, even our system, our protons, electrons are confused, because we are on the wrong time clock. Our clock is not aligned to nature. So, in brief, that's it, Ndlovukazi. Thokoza.
Like that very practical application, I think, of just showing the importance of time and how here on earth, the thing that guides that is the calendar. It's so important. And I really wanted you, I'm so glad you're able to join us to share one example of a tool that we already have that can help us reconnect and preserve some way of life for me, which sort of makes sense even from a practical perspective in terms of align your way of life to nature and the pace of how life is going essentially. And I have a question here. We just have a few minutes, but perhaps might pose this question to you, Dr. Gavin, about the synergy between unbounded organizing and systems thinking. Um, they wanted to know how do they connect? Are they different? Is there synthesis between the two concepts?
Thank you. So I think Mkhulu Nsingiza has in a way started to illustrate how well they are connected. Once we start to understand ourselves as part of the cosmos, with the rhythms of the season, the rhythms of the moon, the rhythms of the sun rising and setting, and align with that system, if you like, align our everyday activity with the seasons, with the times of year when things need to happen. We start to understand what the kind of rhythms should be of human activity, and of, at the moment we have a society that just talks economics the whole time, and economics doesn't know rhythm and doesn't understand alignment with the bigger system, the cosmos, if you like. So I think both Elder Jay and Mkhulu Nsingiza have spoken about how we need to root ourselves in nature and reverence nature, take ourselves seriously, if you like, as used to happen in ancient societies.
Thank you for that, Gavin. And any last words from you with regards to just your observation? You are sort of
let me just come in, Dr. Joy, because we can't hear you. I'm going to say that I'm so glad that Mkhulu brought up Ubaba Credo Mutwa, because not only was he a great Sanusi, but he was also an incredible artist. He wrote, he was a brilliant writer, he did sculpture, he painted. And some of these can be found, obviously, at Guruman. And in Soweto, actually, there's a village, they call it the Oppenheimer Tower in Rockville, Credo Mutwa village, and some of his art is there. And he also has a beautiful sculpture, actually, of the African Trinity, which Elder J touched on. But he does the divine feminine, the masculine, and the child. So that's very incredible. So, and Indaba, My Children, is a book that is so full of knowledge, and his other books, but I would encourage people to start there just to get to see how vast and how far African information, knowledge, artistry, culture, things that are so out of this world. I hope we can get Dr. Joy back.
I hope I'm back. Yes. Thank you. And I think in closing, any last words, also Elder J, from your side?
Well, I think that, this subject that you are raising requires a very deep and profound conversation. And Isa, I think that, having met with Baba Credo and having spent time in Kuruman and then in Soweto, I think that his philosophy, his embracing of life and his wisdom is something that we should deeply appreciate. And I am shocked when I go and speak to young people in universities and ask them, have you read Indaba, My Children? Have you been to the village and seen the sculptures and what they represent? He was a prophesizer. He was a philosopher. He was a polymath. He was a genius, which other cultures have celebrated, like a Leonardo da Vinci, and we do not celebrate our own prophets, our own knowledge holders. And so I am part of a group that is very committed to supporting the way in which the knowledge and wisdom of Baba Credo can be shared today, because it gives us a roadmap to deal with all our challenges. And so, yes, I think that, that's what I would like to leave with it. And I would appreciate young people actually going and learning who we are, not trying to be a poor photocopy of this country or this west or east or north, but what does it mean to be African as the cradle of humanity? And when the world is in complete chaos, we have to come back to the cradle to retrace our steps to find out where we went wrong. And Baba Credo is critical in helping us navigate a new path towards a new humanity that the world needs today. Thank you very much, Dr. Joy. Thank you for convening these type of conversations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And maybe, I know I cut you short a bit, Mkhulu. Do you have any final words, Mkhulu Ntingizi, on your end before we close?
Thokoza, siyabonga Ndlovukazi, sibonge naku comrade, siyabonga kakhulu, for that, contribution. Yes, we need to celebrate our great people, our advisors, our seers, all the people who've been trying to, ground us to our Africanness. And also, what is important is that this calendar affects the whole continent. From Egypt to South Africa, it affects, the whole continent. So therefore, there should be an intention, to actually promote, this calendar so that we realign people. It's amazing when you witness and you hear, young ones, when they hear about this thing, there's a cry for this knowledge. Even in our education system, it should be infused. It should be the foundation, because the calendar is the foundation of everything. Science, all the faculties, even in terms of our spirituality, it is the foundation of our spirituality, because what gave birth to our spirituality, it is that proximity between the sun and earth, which makes certain energies prevalent at a particular time. So education, it should be infused there. But we are knocking on doors. We've been trying to introduce this. The powers that be just don't want anything to, just the calendar. You know, this calendar was launched by Umam Winnie almost over 20 years ago, you know, and we're still trying to knock at the door of, you know, people who should assist, because the work we are doing, it's government work. You know, we don't have the resources to actually concentrate and realign people. So I think there must be a concerted effort, you know, amongst those people who hear the message about credit to promote his work. Thokoza.
I agree with that. In fact, we are giving away 3 calendars at the end of this call to just people that were engaging with us, asking some questions, to at least start triggering you to the right direction as well and start thinking about life in that way. Thank you so much. We are so grateful. This is, I keep saying, quite a rare opportunity to get all these elders on this table. Mimi and I think, are fortunate to soak in, particularly because we represent the generation that is going to impact what happens next, and we accept the call for that. And in moving forward, we need to hear from all angles and all insights from our elders. And for me, what I heard today, identity is important in our and in us just thinking about thriving, and an identity that's expansive enough to think of ourselves in relation to each other and the earth that we are collaborating on and with, right? And there are ways to think of ourselves in an unbounded type of way so that we're not so caught up in the structures of the world, but the fluidity of the passion that transcends that connects us to something better. And the I am part of us, I think, that I got from Jay was the need to almost heal it and balance it and integrate it from this very, toxic masculine dominance to a much more fluid, the feminine, collaborative style that can be able to take in and soak in all of this into the soil that really fuels our ideas, our impact in the world. And there are tools available, particularly from ancient African civilizations, that can guide us on the way, like the Inzalo Yelanga African calendar, that is helping us and has a scientific basis to it as well, when you actually take the moment and the responsibility to figure out how you want to respond to the world around you and what does thriving mean for you. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll continue the conversation. It's a series, and we're grateful for the guys that are on the line with us, guys and girls, Mkhulu no Gogo, the spirits that are with us that guided this conversation today. Until next time, siyabonga kakhulu. Inkosi.
Thank you so much. Yabon.
Ngale bukho mina. Ngale bukho. Thokoza.